The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to begin my speech this morning. I was going to talk about a lot of things, and given the news this morning, or a tweet from the finance minister, has really changed things. So we are here today talking about debating the privilege motion, the failure to produce documents pertaining to the SDTC, and the corruption that has ensued with that. We know that the government is withholding documents from the House of Commons. We've seen this happen before with this Liberal government, and we've had elections over it before in the past. And so here we are again today debating the production of documents, privilege motion. What is that debate about? Well, it is about an organization called SDTC, which is responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in grant funding to companies to pursue so-called green technologies. And so that organization has been tasked with divvying out this money. Now, it turns out, and we've heard from the Auditor General, that nearly $400 million of the dollars that this organization has given out was done under a cloud of conflict of interest, where people that were sitting on this board were giving their own companies money from this organization. Now, that may come as no surprise to Canadians, as Canadians have come to expect that from this government. And Conservatives have been holding the government to account on this for a number of months now. However, what is new today, Mr. Speaker, is that the finance minister has resigned her seat, and she's written a letter to the Prime Minister, and I'd like to read that letter here this morning, just so that we're all clear on what was going on there. So, dear Prime Minister, it's been an honour of my life to serve in this government, working for Canada and Canadians. We have accomplished a lot together. On Friday, you told me you no longer wanted me to serve as your finance minister and offered me another position in the cabinet. Upon reflection, I have concluded that the only honest and viable path is for me to resign from cabinet. To be effective, a minister must speak on behalf of the Prime Minister with his full confidence. In making your decision, you made it clear that I no longer credibly enjoy that confidence and possess the authority that comes with it. For the past number of weeks, you and I have found each other at odds about the best path forward for Canada. Our country today faces a grave challenge. The incoming administration of the United States is pursuing a policy of aggressive economic nationalism, including the threat of a 25% tariff. We need to take that threat extremely seriously. That means keeping our fiscal powder dry today, so that we have the reserves we need to fight a coming tariff war. That means eschewing costly political gimmicks, which we can ill afford and which make Canadians doubt that we recognize the gravity of the moment. That means pushing back against the America First economic nationalism with a determined effort to fight for capital and investment and the jobs that they bring. That means working in good faith and humility with the premiers of the provinces and the territories of our great and diverse country, and to build a true Team Canada response. I know Canadians would recognize and respect such an approach. They know when we are working for them, and they equally know when we are focused on ourselves. Inevitably, our time in government will come to an end, but how we deal with the threat our country currently faces will define us for a generation and perhaps longer. Canada will win if we are strong, smart, and united. In this conviction, it is this conviction which has driven my strenuous efforts this fall to manage our spending in ways that will give us the flexibility we need to meet the serious challenges presented by the United States. I will always be grateful for the chance to serve in government, and will be proud of our government's work for Canada and Canadians. I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues as a Liberal Member of Parliament, and am committed to running again in my seat in Toronto in the next federal election. With gratitude, the former Finance Minister. That is the letter that was written to the Prime Minister this morning. It was shocking news for all of us, and it goes to the fact what Conservatives have been calling for a very long time, is that there is no confidence in this government. Now, we have been saying that for quite a while. The Bloc has recently joined us in this as well, and now the former Finance Minister is suggesting that Canadians have no confidence in this government. What's increasingly concerning or confusing to me, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that the NDP continues to prop up this failed government, continues to provide confidence to this Liberal government, despite the fact that we are now seeing even top-level members of the cabinet no longer have that. We've seen the resignation of the housing minister earlier today as well, in a press conference where he is no longer seeking re-election, and so he has resigned from cabinet as well. So we see that the troubles of our country are piling up, and the government is in chaos and unable to address the issues. Conservatives have put forward a common sense plan to axe the tax, get rid of the carbon tax, to free up our economy, to ensure that we can make it so that Canadians can afford the food. Because when you tax the farmer who grows the food, and you tax the trucker that drives the truck to deliver the food, and you tax the grocery store that sells you the food, Canadians can't afford food. We've seen this over and over again, and we've been relaying this message to the government, pointing out that more Canadians are visiting the food bank than ever before. And we've been calling for a common sense plan to remove the carbon tax, to make us competitive with our neighbor countries like the United States, who are our biggest trading partner in many ways, but also our competition in a number of increasingly number of ways as well. And to have our economy saddled with a carbon tax and the Americans not, puts us at a significant disadvantage. And I think that the finance minister recognized that. She recognized that, and so she chose to resign today. We noticed last week already that there seemed to be some daylight between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister around a fiscal guardrail. Now, we heard repeatedly from the Finance Minister that she was concerned about the finances of our country and that she wanted to keep the deficit to $40 billion. Well, Mr. Speaker, from my perspective, a balanced budget is the thing that we ought to be pursuing, not a deficit of $40 billion. But it appears that in the fall economic statement that the Finance Minister was expected to deliver today, even that target would not have been met. And so we see that increasingly Canadians have failed to, or Canadians are lacking confidence in the government, the Finance Minister is lacking confidence in the government, and they are feeling the weight of the carbon tax, which is hampering our economy and making life unaffordable. And if that wasn't enough, Mr. Speaker, the government intends to triple the carbon tax. If life wasn't difficult enough in Canada, if we can't afford to heat and house and eat in Canada because of the carbon tax at its current level, imagine what it's going to be when it triples over the next number of years. Every April 1st, Mr. Speaker, we get it's not an April Fool's joke. We get an increase in the carbon tax, and this happens over and over again till Canadians can't afford to live. We've also heard from, it's interesting as well that the housing minister resigned today. Conservatives, common sense Conservatives, have put forward a plan to build the homes across Canada by removing the GST on new home builds. This would save on average about $50,000 per new home build, and that would stimulate new home builds across the country. Mr. Speaker, we are building fewer homes than we did in the 1970s, and yet our population growth is dramatically higher than this. I would also point out, Mr. Speaker, that the housing minister formerly was the immigration minister, and so in some way he was responsible in his former role for the problems in his current role, which he was unable to fix and now is resigning from that position altogether. So I wish the the housing minister well in his new endeavors. I hope he's more successful in those endeavors than he was as the minister of immigration and then housing, in the fact that he seemed to have been a total failure in both of those. And it is interesting that on the same day we get two ministers of the cabinet resigning. One very clearly outlining that they have lost confidence in the Prime Minister. Now, it is an interesting to note that in the resignation letter of the Finance Minister, she talks about the ensuring that keeping our fiscal powder dry. Conservatives have been arguing for a long time for that, to ensure that we balance the budget, that we keep the fundamentals of our fiscal home in order. Something that the Prime Minister from the get-go has been odious to achieve. I do remember back in 2015, when I was first running to be a member of Parliament, the Prime Minister saying that he was going to run small deficits. And I remember Prime Minister Stephen Harper at the time pointing out that they were going to run these very tiny, small, tiny deficits. Well, those deficits have ballooned dramatically. Never, ever, I don't think, in the entire tenure of this Prime Minister has the deficit been $10 billion. It has always been dramatically more than that. And so we've seen that initial 4 years of $10 billion deficits has grown into multi-billion-dollar deficits, $60, $70 billion deficits for nearly a decade. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, the national debt has doubled. This Prime Minister has taken on more debt than all other Prime Ministers combined, Mr. Speaker. And so to say that we need to keep our fiscal powder dry, Mr. Speaker, is quite almost somewhat humorous in the fact that I'm glad that the Finance Minister is pointing this out today, but this Prime Minister has failed to do that for nearly 9 years and came in on a promise to run deficit budgets. Mr. Speaker, I do agree with the former Finance Minister when she says that we are facing grave challenges with the prospects of a 25% tariff. We know that under particularly where I come from in northern Alberta, softwood lumber is a major part of the economy in northern Alberta. I always say to everybody that I come from the promised land, and we do forestry, the oil field, and farming where I come from, and we have been suffering under double-digit percentage tariffs on our softwood lumber for as long as this Prime Minister has been the Prime Minister. He has totally failed to secure a softwood lumber deal with the United States. He has put our industry at a significant disadvantage. He has failed to not only defend our industry against American tariffs, but also failed to defend our industry here at home when provincial governments work very hard to shut down the forestry industry. And then he has failed in terms of forest management, where the federal government is exactly involved in it, in Jasper National Park, where the federal government is entirely responsible for forest management, and where we've seen large swaths of the national park burn because of poor forest management practices over the last 10 years. And we've seen that we know what it's like to live under these tariffs in one particular industry, and we are concerned about the possibility of the entire Canadian economy suffering under the threat, or suffering underneath a 25% tariff. And so we need a government that's focused on Canada first. We need a government that's focused on ensuring that we can have a united front here in Canada. And we see from the Liberal government, we see chaos. We see finance ministers resigning, deputy prime ministers resigning their post because the Prime Minister no longer has confidence in them, and they no longer have confidence in the Prime Minister. Conservatives have been calling for a carbon tax election, and I think there's no better time than right now to call that election to ensure that we can have a government that has the confidence of Canadians, that can negotiate with the United States and can ensure that we don't face this 25% tariff that the Americans are threatening, and that we can fix some of these other problems and disputes that we have with the United States around softwood lumber. And that we can restore the dream of the North America free trade that I have lived under my entire life, and that I think was good for North America in general. And we need a government that can combat the Buy America policies of several of the American states, and that we can ensure that we have a fortress North America rather than a conflict between Canada and the United States. I note that the Finance Minister didn't mention in her resignation letter the fiscal anchor that she had put in place for herself. I would note that this was, I think, the third fiscal anchor. She had a declining debt to GDP ratio was the first one, but when that no longer held, then she moved to this $40 billion deficit. I note that she doesn't mention it explicitly in her resignation letter, but we did note last week that there seemed to be a number of rumblings coming out of the Liberal caucus, but also out of the ministry around a dispute between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister over these fiscal guardrails that the Finance Minister had put in place, and whether the Prime Minister was willing to abide by them. What seems obvious from the letter that we've gotten here from the former Finance Minister is that there was a significant disagreement, and that the Prime Minister chose to fire the Finance Minister rather than abide by the fiscal guardrails. The letter notes that on Friday, that is the Prime Minister, told me, that's the Finance Minister, that you no longer wanted me to serve as the Finance Minister and offered me another position in the Cabinet. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is effective dismissal. The Finance Minister is generally noted to be the most high-ranking minister in the Cabinet. It is generally the most prestigious position, and for a transfer out of that position into any other position would be seen as a demotion, which is an effective dismissal. And so I would say that the Prime Minister fired the Finance Minister. This has happened before to Cabinet ministers who have stood up for Canada, stood up for what they believe to be right. We need to look no further than Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was in a very similar position where she felt that the defense of SNC-Lavalin should be done by the company itself in court and not by political interference by the Justice Minister, and got into a dispute with the Prime Minister about this. And we've seen a significant level of pressure brought to bear upon her to skirt around justice, and we've seen what happened to her as well. She was fired as the Justice Minister, and also asked if she was willing to take a lateral move. And so we see that this is an MO of the Prime Minister, that he wants to get his way. No cabinet minister is above, or no cabinet minister may push what is good for Canada, what is good for their ministry. They are insisted upon abiding by the whims and wishes of the Prime Minister. And so today we see another casualty of the whims and wishes of the Prime Minister with the resignation of the Finance Minister, which only goes to cover up again and distract from again the major scandals that have been plaguing this government over the last number of years. And to bring it back to the privilege debate that we have been debating here today, This just adds to a long line of scandals that have been happening with the government. SNC-Lavalin, the weed charity scandal, the SDTC, never mind the environment minister's severe conflict of interest with Cycle Capital. All of these things would be more than enough to take down any government, and yet here we are still standing. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of Government Health here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very quickly, I realize that the leader of the Conservative Party was a member of the inner circle for Stephen Harper. And when he was a minister and parliamentary secretary, when they talk about corruption, I could talk about the anti-terrorism corruption, $3.1 billion, the Phoenix scandal, $2.2 billion, G8 spending scandal, the ETS scandal, the F-35 scandal, the Senate scandal, election scandals, cuts to the Auditor General foreign interference, and that's a long one. And not to mention another booklet of 70 other types of scandals that the leader of the Conservative Party was involved in with the government of Stephen Harper. But my question is more so related to an image that the Conservatives are trying to say to Canadians, and that is that Canada is broken, which is not the case, Mr. Speaker. Canada is the best country in the world to call home. When you compare Canada to the rest of the world, you'll find that our interest rates are down, our inflation is down, jobs, twice as many jobs created under this government as the former leader of the Conservative Party when he sat around the cabinet table. We have the most significant number of trade agreements ever signed in the history of our nation. We have a school food program. We have pharmacare. There's been a lot of proactive things. My question to the member opposite is that does he seriously believe that Canada is broken?
Well, member for Peace River Westlock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Canada is the greatest country in the world, and the government of Canada is indeed broken, and everything is in shambles. We see that cabinet ministers are resigning left, right, and centre. Rumours are that there is 2 more cabinet ministers to resign. I wonder who those will be. Perhaps it will be the environment minister. I think it would be appropriate for him to resign given his severe conflicts of interest that have come to light through Cycle Capital. He owns significant amounts of shares in Cycle Capital. And SDTC, this organization that we are discussing today, gave that Cycle Capital's companies over $200 million in a significant conflict of interest for the environment minister. So I guess my question back to the minister or the member opposite is does he know who the next 2 ministers to resign will be?
Questions and comments? Question commentaire? L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For at least a month now, the Conservatives have decided to paralyze the government, to talk about contempt of Parliament, to talk about the fact that the government has refused to hand over documents requested by Parliament, and to talk about all kinds of examples of corruption in the Liberal Party. But we know that corruption and contempt of Parliament exists because the system allows for it. So why not take this opportunity to be constructive? And so why wouldn't the Conservatives instead talk about what they will do, how they will change the system so that there's less corruption and so that we don't see this kind of situation in the future? Thank you. The Honourable Member for Peace River Westlock.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are looking forward towards a carbon tax election where we will bring in, we'll be able to axe the tax, we'll be able to build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. I'm looking forward to having another confidence vote of which we will be supported by the Bloc, and I'm looking forward to the NDP actually voting with us in non-confidence in this government. We've seen the finance minister has resigned today, stating no confidence in the government. I look forward to the Bloc and the NDP supporting that as well.
And comments? The Honourable Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in the spirit of Christmas, I hope the Honourable Member will join me in wishing the Liberal Party well tomorrow night at their Christmas party, which is being held somewhere close to the hill. So all the best for tomorrow night's Christmas party. Mr. Speaker, we have a government that is literally collapsing in front of us right now. And the only confidence that's being shown in this government is by the NDP. You know, I recall when the NDP Liberal Costly Comfy Coalition was conceived in 2022, I spoke at the time about the fact that the NDP was heading to an abyss of irrelevance and that they were actually playing right into the Prime Minister's hands. Well, the fact that they've supported this government more than 25 times on votes of confidence as it relates to scrapping and axing the carbon tax, the fact that they've continued to show their confidence in the government even after the leader of the NDP ripped up the coalition agreement with much fanfare, the fact that he's here in order to secure his pension, isn't it time that the NDP join not just with Canadians, a majority of Canadians, and show no confidence in this government?
For Peace River Westlock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I don't think it'll come as any surprise to my colleague that I agree with him that we should have another confidence vote in this government, and that the NDP should vote with us on that. I want to recognize the honourable member from Barrie Innisfail in his role as the former House Leader in this place, how he orchestrated and delivered many confidence votes in that time, and I want to thank him for his role in that position. And I look forward to having the opportunity for another confidence vote very soon.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The honourable member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank, through you, to my colleague for his words. So it's quite interesting. I want to bring a date to the mind of those that are in the chamber. February 12th, 2019. Does anybody know what happened that day? Jody Wilson-Raybould resigned from cabinet. It's almost like it's deja vu once again. So we're seeing that even the deputy finance minister, well, previous now, doesn't even have confidence in the Prime Minister. So why is it, because we've seen and we've heard throughout the debate this morning actually, and through commentary, that the NDP have confidence in this Prime Minister, and they've voted over and over and over to increase taxes and to confirm their confidence. We have heard that the leader of the NDP is wanting to protect his pension. He wants to get his pension before he will show non-confidence in the government. Just wondering if the member would agree with that statement.
The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for her question. We have seen over and over and over again, while Conservatives are fighting for Canadians and trying to make life more affordable in Canada, while we're discussing the housing crisis, while we're trying to bring crime down across this country, while we are concerned about the free drugs that are being just handed out in the streets, while Conservatives are focused on the issues that are for Canadians, the NDP continue to support this government for personal gain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Parliamentary Secretary, Government House Leader.
Speaker, I'm wondering if the member could provide his thoughts in regards to the motion we're actually debating today. Has the issue of privilege being brought to the Standing Committee of Procedures and House Affairs? That's the actual motion. That's what the Conservatives have moved forward, so it's their motion. And the Conservatives now have been debating their own motion, hundreds of speakers now on it, all in the name of preventing anything from being debated inside the chamber. My question to the member is, does he believe that the Conservative behaviour is reflective of being parliamentarians that want to work together to get things done for their constituents?
For Peace River Westlock.
No, I do not agree with that member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Comments? The honourable for Red Deer Lacombe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister launched his leadership to great fanfare as a self-professed feminist. And in the time that he has proudly announced his gender parity cabinet and all of the other things that he clings to for whatever reason, photo ops, whatever the vanity project happens to be, we now have seen a trail of women's careers and reputations damaged by this individual. We'll start with Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, Selina Cesar Chavans, and now we see what's happened with the current finance minister. But what's actually shocking to me is that all of this damage to these women's reputations and careers seems to be fine with the leader of the NDP, because he's putting the interests of getting his pension ahead of the careers and reputations of women who have leadership roles in Canada.
Good point.
Why do you suppose that is? I would ask to my colleague.
The honourable member for Peace River Westlock, about 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but I do know that it must be harrowing for the members of the NDP party who have to continually prop up this particular government. I'm thinking particularly of the member from Strathcona who has repeatedly voted for this government and the increases to the carbon tax. We see over and over again that Canadians are struggling under the carbon tax. Canadians are struggling to make ends meet. They cannot afford to heat their homes, to afford food to put on the table. And we see this over and over again. And I can't imagine what that feels like to have to vote to support this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.